He started in consultancy in Lagos before joining GT Bank. You may have heard of it. In 2002, he and his partner bought into a small bank, Access Bank, and proceeded to turn it into first a Nigerian and now an African giant. In 2014, Wigway took over as CEO of Access Bank. This May, Access opened its Paris office. This African giant is going global. Herbert, welcome to the panel. A round of applause, please. So, in a previous conversation, you told me that in your lifetime, you'd seen 4 naira to the dollar to whatever it is today, maybe 1,000 to a dollar today. And a tech entrepreneur I spoke to in Abuja a couple of weeks ago said, I'm literally worth half what I was a couple of years ago in dollar terms. Obviously, for those struggling with the price of a basket of onions, things are far harder. Reform was obviously needed. Perhaps it could have been managed differently, but now it's underway. What do you expect the broader economic effects will be? More FDI as Nigeria becomes more competitive, more predictable for foreign investors? What's the best case scenario? What are the red flags?
Thank you very much, Nick. Let me start by saying that I feel extremely honored and privileged to be seated here in the presence of the President of the Republic of Togo. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for being here. Now, I think that if I look at what has happened to exchange rates across Nigeria and the reforms that the current administration has taken, I think they are very positive things. Those reforms needed to be made, particularly given things that had happened coming from COVID and the supply chain challenges, then the issue of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, etc. So we needed to do all of that, and coming from several years behind where we could have made all of these adjustments. So it's a very painful adjustment, and we've come to grips with it in Nigeria. But those adjustments are important for foreign direct investments, and I think that given the several things that the current administration is doing, which are positive, we will see a significant growth as far as foreign direct investments is concerned. But that's not the issue. I think what is more important are the little things we need to do to stabilize our economies, whether it's in Nigeria or it's in Togo or it's in South Africa, across the entire continent. Why must we keep thinking of foreign direct investments just in the context of money coming from outside of Africa? I think if we work together as a strong region, whether it's within ECOWAS or it's within the entire continent, we represent a very strong force that can actually change the course of events across the entire world. We can get direct investments within the continent, we can support intra-African trade, we can build financial inclusion to the point that these things will just happen naturally. So I think my mindset is just a bit different. We don't need to look outside. We have ourselves to work together to make things differently.
Thank you for that. Well, let's jump straight in that case, to some of the work that you're doing across the continent. South Africa's Standard Bank, when it did its African expansion, it followed its clients abroad, MTN, South African Airlines, big mining companies, so that it always had an anchor client. Is that how you structured Access Bank's expansion?
No, we have a much more aggressive perspective to Africa. South Africa, for several generations, had its own unique issues, as you know, which was coming from apartheid and all before the market opened. It had its positives, though, because they had a closed economy, and so they were detached from the rest of the world. They developed their internal strengths, and so their institutions grew stronger and bigger. Now, how many more clients do they have outside of South Africa? Not that many. So in terms of their foray, it's not been very strong, but they represent a strong institution. Now, it speaks to several things, and I'll come to answer your question in a little while. It means that I can run my institution, I can be profitable, I can be big in Africa, even if I close my doors and worked together with the rest of Africa. Okay. In our own case, it's just a bit different. We think that there is need for greater inclusion of running across the entire continent. So there is need for us to go across ECOWAS, there is need for us to go to Central Africa, there is need for us to go to East Africa, and of course, there is need to go to South Africa. Now, we have structured our growth to be present across the entire continent because we see the entire continent as one block. And if we can basically convince our leaders and our governments to work together, all right, you will have a strong institution. The reason you find most of the foreign banks leaving us is because they have a very fractured approach. So I come to one country, I see the opportunity today in Angola, I make money in Angola today, I run away tomorrow. I come to the francophone world, I extract what I can extract, I run away tomorrow. You can't blame them because they're capitalists. So, but let's leave them as capitalists. For us in Access, let's go to the different countries. Where we see the foreign banks living, we replace them. We support our people. We create greater financial inclusion. We deepen the markets. We continue to do so to the point that across the continent, our governments don't need to look for elsewhere to get financing. We can support our governments. We can provide long-term funding for infrastructure because those foreign institutions have no reason to provide long-term funding for us. So we have a different view. Standard Bank has done quite well, but I think we have a much more aggressive approach towards Africa.
You must be sitting on a lot of very interesting data about trade across the continent, given that you have banks in so many African countries and regions. What are the big trades you're seeing in terms of growth between African markets investing in each other?
Interestingly, the Southern African markets are doing better than West Africa or Central Africa. In fact, the COMESA zone, which is committee of Southern and East African countries, are doing much better than we are. If I take the trade between South Africa and Botswana and Mozambique and Zambia, etc., it runs into several tens of billions of dollars, all right? And of course, Nairobi is linked up there. But what we see in West Africa is very limited trade, very limited. But what we're trying to do is to bridge all of that, all right, and make sure that we start supporting institutions in West Africa to become stronger institutions and therefore support trade, all right? So yes, in Southern Africa, it's stronger than we are, but I think that we represent a strong force and we need to break the barriers that inhibits trade rather, across West Africa. So those are some of the things that I would say, yeah.
So you're bullish on francophone Africa. You don't have to be polite just because we're in Togo.
No, I mean, and Togo is a place I like very much anyway. I come here very, very often. I think that we can do so much more in francophone Africa. I think we'll be wasting our time in Nigeria if we forget that we are 15 countries in ECOWAS. Even if the economies are smaller, there is strength in coming together as one region. Don't look at it as 1 + 1 because it's 1 + 1 is equal to 2. 1 + 1 can be 5. We can rely on our various competencies and economies and skills, etc., and create a much stronger thing. So I'm determined to make sure that we come into francophone West Africa. We're in CIMAC, all right, and support all the countries. Hopefully, we will get all our leaders to support us in the things that we're doing, all right, so that we create a strong institution to support us across the region.
Is the US an interesting target for you, and how might it help Access Bank in its transformation? You've spoken in the past of wanting to be the Citibank of Africa.
Very important question. Now we must look at the world politics and the world economy in whatever we're doing. Nick, you are French, but for several people who are here who are Togolese or Nigerians, you have an account somewhere today, they'll shut it down after a particular level because they don't know you. They'll tell you about compliance issues. What that means is that if we don't grow and we're not in the world stage, one day in time, we will be disintermediated. Maybe disintermediated is a long stretch, but our economies will not grow in the manner in which we ought to grow. That's the first point. Secondly, our colonial past has made it such that there are some big global money-centered regions. So New York is one, London is one, Hong Kong is another, Tokyo is another, etc. If you absent yourself from those places, it also means that you fail to take advantage of what is going to happen, all right, in your own world. Now, for us as Africans, it brings a larger problem because we have to comply with a world that is differentiated against you. Let me put it very simply, all right? But what we told ourselves is that we will keep pushing that basket or pushing that wall until we make sure that we're on the global stage. So we will be in London, we will be in the US, we will be in Hong Kong, we will be in all of these markets, all right, to make sure that our people are not disintermediated, and we will carry out business responsibly. And to show that as Africans, we can actually do things in a manner that is compliant with the whole world, but also make sure our people are not disintermediated. We will make sure that we can access long-term funding to support our different countries, our different institutions, and when foreign institutions discriminate against our people, we will be able to stand firm to support our own industries. We can't blame European or American banks who choose not to be here. It's their decision. We blame ourselves if we're not big enough to support our people. So that's my perspective.
So in essence, you could be the rails of the next phase of globalization for the continent.
I'm determined to make sure it happens. We will never be second class to any institution in the world because we've seen what that means. We will make sure that we represent Africa's gateway to the world. We will support Africans in diaspora in whatever they do, those who are doing responsible things. We will bank them. We will make sure that intra-African payments happen seamlessly. We will make sure we support intra-African trade. We will work with our leaders, all right, to make sure and lean on them a little bit to see the need for greater collaboration across the entire continent, because that is where our strength is. If we didn't push this agenda in the manner in which we're pushing it, we will never grow, and it means we will fall face flat on the floor, and we might as well have stayed in Nigeria alone. But if we want to make that difference in the continent, we have to make sure we create that railroad across the entire continent and represent that star that will always be able to stand in place for our continent.
So you mentioned London and New York. Let's talk about Lagos, which is really emblematic of resistance, pushed back against the British, pushed back against military rule in the 80s and 90s, pushed back against Abuja when it was starved of funds in the early 2000s. Now, in a way, Lagos is running Nigeria in the sense that the foremost heavyweight Lagosian, Bola Tinubu, is in the driving seat as president. Is this just hype from Lagos optimists, or is there something there? Can Lagos deliver for Nigeria?
It's interesting because I think Lagos can. Lagos is home to 26 million people, depending on the day of the week or the time, sometimes 28 million people. And I think that, in fairness, they've basically invested significantly in succession planning. They have a long-term perspective. I think they've broken away from the shackles of the past, all right, in terms of funding. What you will see is significant infrastructure rollout now in Lagos. I was in Cairo 3 days ago, and before then, 10 years prior, and I saw the massive change in Cairo, just coming from infrastructure and how it was running out. Very interesting, as far as I'm concerned, in North Africa and the Maghreb. And I spoke to Lagos State Governor, who is determined to basically make sure we see the same thing. So if you come to Lagos, you will see the 3rd mainland bridge, you will see his 4th mainland bridge coming up, you will see several things coming. Now, the point is that for some people, you may not see that change, you must still see Lagos as congested. But you need to do some of these things, and that congestion needs to get to a particular point before it blows out because of the amount of infrastructure that is being developed. But I still think there's so much more to be done. I think that we can make Lagos to become the financial services hub of the region. That's my view, just because of the sheer size of its economy and the amount of dollars that flows through Lagos and all of that. And I think if we get it right, it will not only represent what is good in Nigeria, it will represent what is good in West Africa and the continent. There will be other cities that will do well. Lomé will do well and will take advantage of its strengths. It has perhaps the deepest seaport that you can get in the region. So we rely on it. Port Harcourt, which is in the southernmost part of Nigeria, is strong in oil. We do the same thing, push infrastructure. So my sense is that while Lagos is strong, you will have other megacities, you will have other parts of the region and the continent investing in infrastructure that can actually transform the continent. I guess I'm too much in a hurry to see that change happen, all right, because we're tired of being put on the back foot.
Do you, in your most optimistic moments, see Lagos have an impact on West Africa in the same way that Singapore has affected all the countries in Southeast Asia? You can do your deals in Singapore, you can trust the markets there, there's the deep enough capital pools, there's a legal and regulatory framework that everyone can adhere to, and that really drove a lot of investment in Southeast Asia. Can Lagos play the same role?
Lagos can play the same role, but there are a couple of things that need to be resolved. First of all, we need to get and lean on all our leaders in the sub-region to endorse it. Otherwise, it will just be the leader in Nigeria, which is not what we're looking for. We're looking for a market that is deep enough to support the entire worst-case ECOWAS. All right, so that needs to happen. There's need for there to be realignment of regulations across the entire sub-region. There's need for us to have some interesting political consistency and understanding amongst our leaders for all of these things to happen. There is need for the right infrastructure, and in fairness, I know that the Lagos State Governor has been pursuing it over the last week or so, the appropriate infrastructure to support all we're doing. So in terms of investments in the capital markets, all right, to be able to access long-term funding, irrespective of where you are, as you mentioned, Singapore. All of those things are critical for it to happen. I think Lagos just being the strength in Nigeria is not good for us in the continent. It's not good for us in the sub-region. Somebody must be able to go from Mali and access money in Lagos. Somebody must be able to go from Niger or Togo and access money from Lagos. Somebody building a deep sea port in Togo must be able to raise money on that same market. And the reason Lagos is not because of any other reason, but because of the sheer size of the economy, if you get the point I'm trying to make. So until all of us agree and decide to work together and make sure that the differences are cleaned up, all right, for proper transparency, it will be difficult. But I think it's possible if our leaders push in that direction.
Now, you mentioned the diaspora. There was a very interesting discussion chaired yesterday by a representative of the IFC about creating instruments that the diaspora would be willing and happy to invest in. The very singular patriotic determination of Ethiopia to finance a $7 billion dam with very little, if any, outside financing by creating an instrument that the diaspora could invest in was fascinating. But the T word came up quite quickly, trust. Is there trust for the diaspora when faced with governments on the continent? And if there isn't trust, is there space for African corporates, African financial institutions to look at raising diaspora bonds? What are your broader thoughts on how best Africa can harness its diaspora, and specifically on this issue of corporates floating diaspora bonds?
Okay, Nick, I think that a lot of things have changed over time. The issue of raising diaspora funding, if I look back 25 years ago, when we had MoneyGram and the other money transfer institutions coming into the continent, I know that one institution basically securitized about $3.6 billion, I'm talking of 25 years ago, all right, and used it to support infrastructure. Just one, in Nigeria. Now, the market has changed. The source of these monies have become very different. I'm talking of the mechanism through which it comes in. Now it comes in through fintechs, et cetera, et cetera. So the determination of how that money can be channeled is something that our regulators need to sit down and work with fintechs, all right, to make sure that it is harnessed, rather than the money getting lost and being used in a manner that is not properly channeled. So a lot of times when I hear about the discussions around fintechs and banks and regulators thinking differently, I think what is important is for regulators across our region, whether it's in Nigeria or it's in ECOWAS, to think of how best to harness the advantage of these players. So you're not going to have money coming in from MoneyGram in the manner which is coming before. It's coming in through fintechs. So let's regulate the fintechs or create a construct to protect the fintechs so that we can have a complete database of how money is coming in and therefore create the appropriate instruments for these monies to be used to support long-term infrastructure. And it can happen. But so far, I think most of the regulators have created a blockage in terms of we don't understand fintechs, so let's over-regulate them. I think we need to rethink that construct if we want to basically encourage proper diaspora flows, which can be securitized to support the growth of our economy. The world has to start thinking differently. The traditional banking models are not going to support us going into the future.
Talking of patriotism, there are some Nigerians who just simply cannot with Nigeria anymore, and they receive an offer to leave UK, US, Canada. I know the tech sector is particularly affected. Phenomenon is called japa in Nigeria. How has that affected your bank, the banking sector more generally? Because Nigeria is certainly being targeted by foreign companies who want Nigerian tech workers.
Okay, I'll share three perspectives with you. Nigeria is being targeted, so we're losing a lot of people. But several of us are working with different models to make sure that quality service is being protected. And we're doing so by engaging, for instance, tech partners in Dubai and in different parts of the world, so that even when people emigrate, they don't even know that they're working for you in a different part of the world, if you like. All right? So that's the first point. The second point is that this is not the first time people are leaving Nigeria or Africa to go overseas. It happened in the 70s, it happened in the 80s. At the slightest economic downturn, people choose to leave. So it's always happened. Now, obviously, some of us feel it now more than ever before because of our share size and the risks of any type of disruption, if you get the point I'm trying to make. But we are investing heavily, very heavily in people, making sure that we are creating several layers of succession of good quality people, so that when you do have people leave, you can basically make sure that they are replaced almost seamlessly. Never as seamless as it should be, but almost seamlessly. But what we keep sharing with people is this. And it goes back again to my perspective of history and our colonial past. So you say you are tired of Nigeria or you are tired of Togo because you carry a different passport. Please, you're not English. You say you're French. You're not French. One day you're going to complain, oh, they're discriminating against me. Come back home and solve your problem. Why must you go and stay there? You know? And I tell everybody in Nigeria the same thing. We've seen people leave. You go there, then you get to a glass ceiling at an appropriate age. When you've given your best, you start complaining about those societies. It's your problem. So what we're doing is to talk to our young people. That is not the solution. The only solution we have is to stay at home and change our country and our continent. If not, you will shout, Black Lives Matter. Yes, they do matter. But stay at home. Grow your country. Grow your continent. It's the painful reality. I mean, I'm not being stereotyped. I'm just sharing my perspective. So if you're at home and you're in Togo, who will disturb you in Togo? Nobody will disturb you. If Togo is strong or Nigeria is strong, who will disturb you there? Nobody. So why are you complaining that they're treating you somehow in America? It's your problem. You brought it upon yourself. That's my perspective.
You obviously care about the youth because you've invested a significant sum in a new university. Can you explain some of the thinking behind that?
Okay, so let me share how I got into that whole thing with you. It's part of this japa syndrome. Every country or continent has modeled its own education against what it wants to do. So you have the Ivy League universities in the US, so went to Harvard or Stanford or any of the good universities, is trained to provide good quality education for Americans. If you go to France, you have good schools, INSEAD, all of them, trained to provide excellent quality education for the French. You go to England, you meet Oxford, Cambridge, etc. Excellent education for the English. You see the same thing in Asia. Why can't we provide excellent quality education for Africans? So we complain about leadership and patriotism. Where will you learn about African patriotism? Is it in America or France or Asia? You have to learn it in the continent. If you look at our leaders in the 60s and the 70s, they were big on Pan-Africa. So what has happened subsequently, even leaders in business, etc., people have become more and more myopic. What we're trying to do is to create the next generation of leaders that will ignite the future of our continent. And except we get into their minds and take away the shackles of that colonial past, every time and everything we do, we start thinking, let's look forward to what the Western world will say. We don't need to. We have to start asking ourselves, how do we build ourselves locally? I give a reference to South Africa. And the reference was it's not supposed to be a negative reference, it's a positive reference. It just showed how in the period of adversity, they stayed and grew their economy properly and their industries. So if we look at it from a more positive mindset, it means we can stay and grow our own economies without looking outside, but this time without adversity. Very, very important. And you mentioned, and I did say so, I saw the Naira at 4 Naira to the dollar as an adult, and I'm seeing it at 800 or 900 or 1,000 to the dollar right now. So, okay, it would appear that I've suffered. It's not too late to change. We have 66 million customers in Access, which is about the same size as Citibank globally, which means that my balance sheet should be close to maybe $1 trillion. Okay, but the history of our countries and our continents have affected us. But I think it's never too late. I think it's about time we grow, and we're seeing it. The more we move across the continent and other parts of the world, we're creating a more resilient balance sheet. I know there are some countries in the continent, but there are also strong currencies to ensure that we create an institution that will be strong for all of us. So the university has 30% of its curriculum geared towards leadership, entrepreneurship, and innovation. And we say we are creating a fearless generation of Africans who will not look for where to work, but will create jobs. And we're creating a team of partners who are going to support all of them, and venture capital people who would provide them funding if they want to start their business. It's not just a Nigerian institution. We'll get people from Togo, we'll get people from Cameroon, we'll get people from Rwanda. We'll move across the entire continent to make sure it's inclusive for all of Africa.
Does this vision come together with your interest and investment in art and creativity across the continent? This, help to remove the myopia, help Africans stop looking for Western models and see the strength that they have at home.
So, Nick, I read an article 10 days ago, a bit more, and the article said that by the year 2050, 1 out of every 4 people in the world will be African. And it was looking at birth rates and the growth rates in population. So if you look at our continent, we have our birth rates, we have our median age today at about 19. For India, it is 28. For the US, it is 38 years old. So that number is real, because the women who are going to have these children are already born, they're here, if you get the point I'm trying to make. Because by year 2050, it means that that person is 27 years if the person was born here today, I'm just saying. So we're going to make that thing is going to happen. So it means that this is a positive thing because we have a large market coming. And with young people, they are mostly in the creative sector. And you see it everywhere. You hear of Afro beats, whether you're in Paris or you're in London or you're in Hong Kong, the same African music. We see our people, you know, as far as film is concerned, you see them across. You see them in fashion. That is where the young people are. When we're much younger, if you told your parents you were going to university, they'll say you must read medicine, law, engineering, etc. If you told them you were in the creative sector, they won't let you, they won't pay that school fees for you. In fact, if you were using your left hand to write, they will beat you until you change it to the right hand, not knowing that that was where the genius, that is where the true genius is. So we are making sure that we start to empower our youth in the creative sector. I cannot build cars better than the Germans today, but we have more creative people than them. Let's focus on where our strengths are and sharpen them. So when you have an African artist from Togo, you don't know how to fine-tune him, either in music or in whatever he is doing, to be the best he can be. But what we now want to do is let's take a lot of these young people, support them, fine-tune their creativity, and teach them how to commercialize it. That is our own Mercedes-Benz, our response to Germany, for instance. So that's what I'm talking about, and that's what we're doing.
Fantastic. So last question then, and on a more personal note, we just want to know what makes you tick. You're at the pinnacle of your profession, you're a billionaire, you've taken your bank to the top, and you're also getting to a certain stage in your life, without being indiscreet about your age, but where you start to, you know, prompt some reflection. So what motivates you, and what is the Herbert Wigwe plan for the next decade?
First of all, I don't know about being a billionaire. I think that I am infinitely passionate about being African. I think I was blessed to have worked with people who gave me very early in my career the opportunity to be the best I could be in our 20s. They saw the future in investing in us, but not enough time for them to do all what they really wanted to do. I've had the unique privilege also of being discriminated against, and I've told myself that for as long as I live, I must leave an impact on the continent. People must remember me for the impact I have made. I spend a lot of time with young people, and I'm talking of not just Nigerians, across the continent. I'm determined to make sure that across, and that was why we started growing, by the way, there's no greater high in my head than I set up a bank in Mozambique, and I go back 10 years, and I see them as big guys in that country. Or I set up something in Cameroon, I go back, and I see them as successful people, if you get the point I'm trying to make. It is these little things that we do. It can never be money, never, 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 that give you that high that you cannot even imagine. And when I decided to set up a university, I read about somebody who said that of all his greatest accomplishments, and by the way, he set up at the University of Virginia, they asked him what would he want to be remembered for. He said because he wanted to be remembered only for the fact that he set up the University of Virginia. And I thought about it deeply. The greatest thing we can give to our people is a sound education, a sound ideology that will transform us. If those are the things we are remembered for, each and every one of us as Africans, and maybe it will not be in our lifetime, and Africa will be at the center stage of the world, then I think it's the greatest thing, and that's the greatest high I can get in my lifetime.
Ladies and gentlemen, Herbert Wigwe.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick.
A big round of applause, please. Thank you very much. That was a fascinating chat. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I'd like to invite to the stage Osamudiame Adams, partner at Mazars, to present on the growth dynamics of Nigerian banks.
Good afternoon, everybody. Bonjour à tous. His Excellency and the beautiful people of Togo, thank you very much for having us here. And I'll just quickly run through the quick slide about the Pan-Africa future of Nigerian financial services. It's very important that we highlight a few things that we are very aware of, and just to provide a bit of context. So Nigeria has the largest economy in Africa, largest population, and to give a bit of context, when we talk about population, we have a bit over 200 million people. That represents about 15% of everybody that lives in Africa, and that also represents about 50% of people that live in West Africa. And I think Mr. Herbert made mention about that share size and the strength in numbers. We also see what we have within the financial services in Nigeria. We have the maturity, the total asset of the Nigerian banks, well over 100 trillion naira. Depending on the conversion rate you're using, that's well over $100 billion. The tier 1 capital within that space also, we see that is well over 14 billion USD, and it's growing. Look at it from last year and this year, year on year, there's been a very good growth in the financial services, and we expect to see more of that. A very, very important statistic with respect to the number is also the divide of the population. So within the 230 million people, over 70% of Nigerians are below 35 years. And what does that mean to the Pan-African future of financial services? It means that we're not just strong for today, but there's a huge prospect, a lot of opportunity into the future. And that's what we want to tap into. Also, if you look at the fintech dynamics within the continent, currently a bit over 32% of all the fintechs in Africa have their roots in Nigeria. We have the likes of Bamboo, Flutterwave, Moneypoint. They've gone beyond just being fintechs. We have Sparkle also, gone beyond being fintech, but they are even investing and even setting up ecosystem of the next generation of fintech. And these are drivers of what the Pan-Africa financial services would be. And some of the drivers from a Nigeria standpoint is the fact that after the elections, there's been the quiet, and we've gone back to doing what we know how to do best. During the elections, a lot of us literally had our camps. We wanted our people to come in, but that has gone, and even the court cases are gone. So now we're back to doing what we are very good at doing, building. We have very orthodox policies coming back. We have the floating of the exchange rate. We have the tax reforms. You have appointments to some very critical offices of people that will drive very practical tax policies. And we are very positive, and I think Mr. Herbert alluded to that. We're very positive that it wouldn't get worse than it is. You know, there are times when you implement certain policies and you have a bit of stick. Then what happens after that is a rebound. So we're expecting the rebound, not just from a local standpoint, we're also expecting the rebound to go across the region and also across Africa. One other driver we want to make mention of is also the future soundbite. So we have the Minister of Finance, you have the Central Bank Governor, everybody speaking in a very consistent manner with respect to how we want to grow the economy. For the very first time in a long time, you hear the President, the Minister, the CBN Governor almost speaking in harmony. So you need that kind of conversation to give a lot of confidence to the investing community. And that is not just about Nigeria alone, it's also about the region, the West Africa region, as well as the continent. I'll quickly run through some of the opportunities and also how can the Nigerian financial services take advantage. The first one is the ACFTA. Last year, during one of the presentations, I know the PAPS and the AFREXIM team spoke extensively about the benefits of ACFTA and how even by implementation alone, there will be savings of over $5 billion in cost with respect to intra-Africa trading and transactions. So Nigerian banks and Nigeria financial services institutions, they are taking position as we speak to ensure that they are part of that ecosystem. It's also important to know that with the old PAPs and the old AFCTA, you need the banks and financial institutions to be in that conversation along the last mile. You need the structures they have, you need the expertise they have, you need the people and the products they've developed, and we can see that flowing through the continent. We also know that the revenues that will come through the ACFTA, I think there's going to be an increase of about 1% in intra-Africa trade. Once that happens, it means that the balance sheet size of the banks also would swell, and also the profitability. Yesterday, the CEO for UBA made mention of some of the strategies that they've put in place, and someone also explained the contribution of the rest of Africa to the Nigerian balance sheet. So the context of following the leader is also a very important one. We see Access Bank, we see UBA, we see Zenith Bank, and the strategies they've taken and how successful they've been. So it's a very big driver, and we're seeing other banks, fintech, also following that lead. A very interesting example is also, if you look at the fintech, you see Flutterwave, you see Bamboo, MoneyPoint, everybody following the strategy that works. And it's very important. Finally, on this slide, I'll talk also about technology. So we have very complex and very advanced technology now driving our businesses. You have banks already having a full suite of digital bank. They could do everything end-to-end just on your mobile phone. And this also is driving the inclusion and also expansion through Africa. We expect that to go on. And our people and our resources and the product that we have is also very scalable. One thing I will emphasize is how do we ensure that this is transferable across Africa is the knowledge sharing. Good enough, we have someone like Mr. Albert here talking about his experiences. We need more of that. We need people to believe more in their ability to cross-sell and also cross-work together across the continent. I'll run through the last slide around the trade and credit. I'll just speak to one aspect of it. We can learn from what the financial services institution in Nigeria, what they've been through. I remember there was a transaction in 2018, 2019. It was a green bond issued by Access Bank, not South Power. And that was the first time we learned a lot about how do we treat the green bond, how do we ensure in the books of the lender or the person providing the facility, how it's treated. We can take all these lessons from the product, the design of the technology, the people, and take it across Africa. So we expect more of this collaboration. Finally, I'll end on this slide. There is a need for Pan-African conversation beyond financial services. People, products, beliefs, ideology. There are value that you will get from the Nigerian financial institution, be it insurance, bank, fintech, and the likes. And more importantly, there are evidences already. We have the Access Bank, UBA, Flutterwave, and the likes. And we can actually capitalize on this to make Africa what we want to be. I'll wrap up with the very popular Africa saying that says if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We as Nigerians within the community, we are ready to go far. Are you ready? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adams. I'd like to call up onto stage His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Togo, and Herbert Wigwe for a photo session. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That wraps up this session. I'd like you all to put your hands together, please, for Mr. Herbert Wigwe. Thanks again. And enjoy your lunch.